Hey guys, Sean here. Today, Luke and I are back with another tier list. Today we'll be talking about the best budget decks post Infinite Forbidden. So let's get right into it. We have a lot of really good decks to talk about, so let's start with the tier names. We have Savings with Synchros, Tesco branded, Mimic Goldmine, and Loan Shark. So let's begin with a really cool new deck. Well, new support anyway. We have good old Gimmick Puppet. Now I'm thinking, right off the bat, I'm thinking maybe about here.
I definitely agree. Gimmick Puppet's been doing really good stuff lately. The new support is great for the archetype, and also it's cheapest ships as well, so honestly you're not really spending a whole lot when you're making this deck. The new support is easy enough to understand as well, so it's a very low barrier to entry. I think it's a really powerful deck as well.
Being an FTK deck, it's like one of the best things you can do against, the tier 0 meta is to just kill them before they can kill you. The new Field Spell is basically another version of your Sanguine Summoning. Just a field spell that prevents your opponent's monsters from affecting your monsters unless they're XZs. It's just really good. It's pretty consistent as well. Having a consistent FTK deck is just really nice. It doesn't need the battle phase, you can run a bunch of board breakers, which is really cool, like Evenly and Forbidden Droplet. Of course, with the time rules being what they are, this deck is really good in time because it just burns your opponent. So even if you can't OTK them, you can still basically win in time if you're in the final game coming to the end of time. So I think it's really cool. The cards are very cheap. Some of the older ones might be a bit expensive, but overall the deck is just a really good budget deck. It topped the North American WCQ, and that's pretty good evidence for me. That's going to be a pretty damn good deck.
The only thing I will say is you want to be careful if you're investing in this deck, although it's not much price-wise. We have a ban list coming up in August, which this might be a victim of, so just be very careful with that.
Next up we have Tier, another deck that has topped the North American WCQ. And Tier just never dies. I think Tier is here just because a lot of cards will get reprinted in the upcoming tins. So that's going to be great. Tier is basically going to be a budget deck, which is going to be fantastic. Even right now, it's not too bad. The deck just never dies. It doesn't even need Kit Close. The deck can just do so much. Combining it with stuff like Destiny Heroes and Shaddolls and Dangers, there's so many little engines you can put into Tier. Because milling cards is just such a broken mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! So it's just a fantastic deck. Tier will never die. It's insane. It can even be mixed with Horus, which are getting reprinted soon as well. Lightsworn is another good engine for it as well. A bit more expensive, but it does work. I think Tier is just fantastic. A really good budget deck. At least in the next few months it will be.
Yeah, definitely. Just reprints are just such a big thing. You see it all the time, especially if you go to locals and things like that. When cards get reprinted, people just really want to buy them, especially if they're powerful. The amount of times I kept seeing Evenly Match being played after it was reprinted in the Trap Trick Structure deck, I feel like it's going to be the same thing. With all the tier cards are finally going to be reprinted in the tins, a lot more people are going to be picking up the deck. And it's going to be very satisfying for people that kept losing to these big expensive tier decks during tier format. They can now play a bit of their own. I think it's going to be a main player in the coming formats after this ban list. I'm really excited to play it myself when they finally get reprinted in the tins.
One thing I want to mention is that Shifter is going to be a lot more popular because it really just feels like a lot of decks, you either play tier 0 or you play Shifter. So this deck really dies to Shifter. So it's going to be a bit tough in that regard, and this deck cannot play Shifter. So keep that in mind, but against other hand traps like Droll, you have a pretty good matchup against Droll, which is another really popular hand trap this format. So I think Tier has a pretty good position. Next up, Labyrinths. Now, if we're looking at the North American WCQ, I know we keep bringing it up, but a Labyrinth list topped that was under €100, which is insane. Again, getting reprinted in the tins, so it's fantastic. The list didn't even run transaction rollback, which is pretty crazy. But if you want to be versatile with this deck, it would be really good to have transaction rollback and a few more expensive cards like Chaos Angel and stuff like that, which again is getting reprinted. Now is probably the best time to pick up Labyrinth compared to what it's been like before. It's probably at its cheapest point now when the reprints come out, so I think Labyrinth's pretty good. In this meta, it might not be the best, so maybe for that factor we'll bring it down. But I think it's still a very solid deck. There's no denying, Labyrinth is just a fantastic deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! But I think compared to the other ones, and with kind of budget in mind, I think it belongs about there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Definitely middle of the road, very good, solid deck. Maybe not the exact format for it right now, but hey, it did do well at that tournament. So I'd definitely say we'll see more of it, especially when their Butler's being reprinted, as well as another one, their main traps being reprinted in tins as well. Yeah, Transaction Rollback is an expensive card that probably won't be reprinted for another little while, but hey, we haven't seen a lot of the cards that are going to be reprinted in 25th Anniversary Bonanza, so we can hold out hope. Labyrinth's still pretty good though, but just maybe not as good as some of the other decks that we're going to be talking about later.
Next up we have Kashtira. As I mentioned before, this is very much going to be a tier 0 or shifter format. As a shifter deck, I think Kashtira is probably the best. If you compare it to something like Floowandereeze, Exorcisters, even Ritual Beasts, I think it has a really good position as a shifter deck. Only problem is, Fenrir is still a bit pricey, but all the other Kashtira cards are getting reprinted, which is great. Where most decks that run shifter, there is a bit of a downside. Kashtira benefits from shifter, which is fantastic. I think it's not a bad option.
Yeah, one thing I will say about this is that one kind of pattern I noticed with Konami recently is they kind of just hit cards randomly, and you're kind of thinking that they were hit maybe a bit too late. One example of this would of course be like Borload Savage Dragon and Barone both getting hit as well, even though they probably could have been hit earlier or whatever. I think Fenrir is very much on the chopping block for a ban list. If not getting banned, probably limited or something like that. He just finds a way into a bunch of other decks. And considering his price now at this current state, and it doesn't seem like he's going to be getting a reprint in the tins either, I do think that it'd be likely that Fenrir is going to stay expensive and then it might get a bit of ban list treatment as well. Which it seems very likely, to be quite honest with you. Kashtira is still suffering from some ban list hits as well. Most prominently with a Rise Heart and things like that. But all the other cards are getting reprinted, so maybe some people would kind of like form a new form of Kashtira where it doesn't really need a full set of Fenrir to function, and all the other cards will be cheap enough for people to buy and actually make the deck around. I think, yeah, it's a bit pricey right now when you're thinking about the Fenrirs, but I'm just thinking in the future, Fenrir might get hit and then we might be seeing a cheaper Kashtira deck.
Next up we have Pearly. I think Pearly is the first top tier deck because Pearly is just fantastic and it's cheap as all hell. The reprints made this deck genuinely super affordable, and Pearly is just one of those decks that's just really good. Compared to Master Duel, the deck hasn't been hit much at all. We have Delicious and Sleeping Memories at 2, but all the cats are at 3, so the deck's in a really good position. Tower's monsters are just fantastic, and being able to bounce cards from the field and grave is just fantastic. Pearly's has always been one of those really good decks. It can fit a bunch of hand traps in it too. The only problem is again, it's going to be a Droll format, so this deck really suffers with Droll. But this deck can also really play around Droll. If you draw a bunch of quick play spells, you can activate them all in your draw phase, which really plays around Droll. But it's something to keep in mind. I think this deck is going to be really good.
I definitely agree. Honestly, the evidence is with me because I didn't know anything about Pearly. I didn't know how to play it at all. But I seen all the cards were getting reprinted in Rarity Collection 2, and I seen how cheap all the other cards that weren't getting reprinted were, and I thought I could make this deck for less than about €60. So I thought, why not? So I just bought all the cards there and then learned how to play it after. And honestly, it is a really good deck. Sure, there's a little learning involved, which can be a bit tedious, especially when you're like trying to really master the deck. But the deck is really good and really cheap too, so it's definitely one to look out for in the future. As I previously mentioned, as soon as cards get reprinted, a lot more people just have access to them, so you're going to see it represented way more. And Pearly is definitely going to be no exception to this. It's a really cheap deck, really consistent. I think it can hold itself among the titans with the other tier 0 decks right now, so I look forward to seeing its future this format.
Next up we have Sprites. Sprites have gotten a lot cheaper, and there's a lot of different variants you can play. Personally, I think Pure Sprite is the best way to play, mainly because it can run Shifter. But other Sprite variants are really cool. Tri Sprite, Gishki Sprite is a funny one. Live Twin, Runic for Hire, Melfi. There's a bunch of different variants of the deck you can play. But I do think the Pure variant is the best, both for your wallet and for competitive. One big issue, however, with Sprites is that the new Max C type of card, Mulcharmy Perulia, or whatever it's called, that kills Sprites. Sprites mainly summon from hand. So if your opponent sides that in, you're going to be having a really rough time. So that is one of the downsides. It really does focus on summoning from the hand. But if you can get past that, I think it's a really damn good deck. So definitely one of the best decks if you're a budget player.
I'd put it a little bit higher, to be honest. I'd put it just below Pearly in the top tier.
Fair enough.
Same with Synchros. Just because it's been reprinted and like heavily reprinted, not short printed at all, so a lot more people have access to it. Honestly, I made the video like the different ways to play Sprite, and I've seen a lot of different people having success with it. More notably, the guy who won the WCQ in South America, he topped with Melfi Sprite, even though it had very little Melfi cards in it and a lot more frog cards in it. It's still a really good consistent deck and also really easy to learn. I see your point about the new Maxi card, and yeah, it kind of sucks that it really hurts Sprite in that sense, but at the same time, that card right now is about €30 and it's subject to go up. So I think only the top players will be playing it. If you're bringing Sprite to locals, you probably won't run into it an awful lot. So I think Sprite definitely deserves its place among the giants. I mean, it went toe to toe with Tier during Tier format, so it speaks a lot of volumes in that.
Next up we have Branded. I think Branded is like better Tier, kind of. The deck basically hasn't been hit since it came out. Branded Fusion is still unlimited. We're not in OCG or Master Duel. The gimmick Puppet Lock is still in the game. A lot of the cards have been reprinted, and the more expensive cards like Quem and Gwanguinol are being reprinted as well in the tin. So the deck's price is going to go way down, which is just fantastic. Even the Luber's been reprinted a bunch of times at this point. The deck is just going to be so damn good and so budget. Branded Despia has always been a deck that's like been in the meta. It's never been rogue, it's always been like a tier 2 or tier 1 deck. Which is just crazy because since it came out it's always just been at the top of playability. And now it's really affordable, so it's just fantastic. Maybe certain cards like Sanctifier might be a bit expensive, I'm not 100% sure if they're getting reprinted or not, but overall the deck is just so much cheaper than it used to be, and I think this is a fantastic time to pick up Branded, because Branded is just a very solid deck.
Yeah, I really like how innovative people can be when it comes to Branded. There's always ways that people can just throw in like random fusion monsters that they can easily summon out. That new Light and Darkness fusion monster is actually pretty good on its own, and you can run it in Branded without having to run any of those like pretty actual main deck Light and Darkness Dragon monsters. So yeah, I definitely think Branded will be more experimentation, and the fact that Quem is being reprinted in the tins is just even more reason why a lot more people will be picking this deck up. So you're definitely going to see Branded still kicking about at locals and maybe more at a competitive level as well.
Next up we have Tenpai. I'm going to put Tenpai in the top tier. Now, Trident Dragon is getting reprinted in the tin. That was the main card in the deck that was just so expensive that most players just couldn't get if they wanted to play on a budget. The main core of Tenpai is so cheap. The new card that came out is very good and you only really need 2 copies. And that's not going to cost you more than about a tenner. So it's just so damn good for a budget deck, and it is one of the top like 3 decks in the format. Tenpai is just fantastic. Some of the extra stuff is a bit expensive, like your Promethean Princess and your Salamangreat Raging Phoenix, but they're not even 100% necessary, and even Promethean Princess is getting reprinted in the next few months with the Bonanza set. So this deck is just really good for a budget option, really good in general. The only issue is that there is a big chance it will get some sort of hit on the ban list. In the OCG, Sanguine Summoning went to 2. It could be worse than TCG, who knows. But I think it's a really solid deck. Even if it does get hit, I still think it's going to be really good and 100% still really budget.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you say there. I can't really add too much to it. I do agree it probably will get a bit hurt on the ban list, but I think it might go through generally unscathed. Maybe there might be an indirect hit that we're not really looking at that might affect it. Who knows, but I definitely think Tenpai is just a really fantastic deck. I just really like going second OTK decks. I think they're really cool. So seeing Tenpai do well makes me really happy, and I really hope that we see a lot more representation of this in the future. Next up is Sharks. Not even with the memes, I will stick it in Lone Shark, to be quite honest with you. Yeah, you can argue it'll go at the end of maybe Goldmine, but Sharks right now, they're good. However, I don't see them being represented a lot. I've been playing Umi Control with a bit of a Shark engine right now, and I've been enjoying it well enough, but I don't think now is really the format for Sharks. Especially considering, as you previously mentioned, that new Maxi card where you're summoning from hand. A lot of the Sharks do kind of summon from hand and get their effects going from there, which can like really set up your opponent really well. And also, still some of the main Sharks, such as your Abyss Shark, is still pricey enough. Although you can argue that like you need 3 Abyss Shark, much like you need your 3 Pydra for your 10 Dragon, which will roughly be the same price, and then the rest of the deck is cheap. I don't know, it's just really comparing chalk and cheese. Like 10 Dragon is still really good and consistent, whereas Sharks can still brick a little bit. Don't get me wrong, I love Sharks, but maybe now it's just not the format. But it's definitely a really fun budget deck. I definitely recommend giving a go. Even if you want to experiment with a little bit of Umi, I think Shark Umi is a really good way to go. And even with the XD's armor little package, I think it's just a really, really fun deck. This is the main point of this video, is we're talking about like really good budget decks. Shark definitely wins on the budget end of things, but maybe not necessarily on the power end of things.
I will say, if you're a fan of Sharks, do hold out for a few months, because Sharks are getting a good bit of support in the next few months, and that might turn the tides, so keep an eye out on Sharks, they might surprise you. Next up we have Dark World. Now, kind of similarly to Sharks, on the budget side they're great. They're even getting Dark Corridor reprinted soon, which is going to be great. However, it's Dark World, it's a great deck, but again, especially summons a lot from hand, it dies to Shifter, absolutely cooked. It's a very glass cannon type of deck, and if you're going to play a glass cannon type of deck, there are better decks to play than Dark World. However, very fun, very budget. I think it's like not a bad kind of rogue deck to play. Just for fun around locals, you might find success with it at bigger events, but I think for now, it's not the best. Maybe in combination with the Fiendsmith engine, because they are fiends, but then we're not talking about a budget deck, we're talking about a top tier deck. So yeah, I don't know. I think about here for now. They're budget, you can find success with it 100% at a low price, but for now, I don't think it's time for Dark World. Next up, Exodia!
Let's go!
Best deck in the game. Exodia, Obliterate, FTK, let's go. So, unironically, not even too bad, pretty damn budget, and can run Shifter. So there we go, that's all we need to hear. For being honest, I'd say maybe about... I want to put it higher because it's Exodia, it's so cool.
Let's meet in the middle, put it at the top of Mimi Goldmine, maybe.
People are going to get mad that Labyrinths are lower than Exodia. But fuck it, it's fine.
This is our list, it's fine.
Exactly. It can run Shifter. Labyrinth can't run Shifter. You know what? You know what else can't run Shifter? Here, they can run
there
Shifter.
You go.
There we go.
Well done, Labyrinth player. Look what you did. You know what? Exodia can also play Secret Villager spellcasters as well. So you're just setting up a really good floodgate, and also with Shifter too. Just really powerful, generic enough cards Exodia can play, and it's really, really good.
The biggest problem is that you have to run like the 5 Exodia pieces in the deck, so you're really incentivized to run like a 60 card build so you don't actually draw them. But it's a lot of really cool cards in the deck. Your guys go to the spell trap card zone. It can OTK pretty easy, you can wipe the board. Being able to run Shifter is just so damn good. Like, it's just such a really cool Shifter deck. It's also pretty new, so a lot of people might not know what you're onto until they get obliterated by Exodia. So I think it's pretty cool. I really hope Exodia finds some success. But if we're talking about a pure budget deck, it's pretty damn good for budget. Next up, Heroes. I think Heroes belong maybe about here.
Really? That's very high.
Okay,
no?
maybe that's a bit too high. Maybe a bit above Exodia. Something like this, maybe. I don't know.
Ooh, this is tough now, because Heroes just been around for so long that it's kind of like people just know what to expect from them at this stage.
It dies to draw as well. Like, they did not consider that.
You know, I was thinking like top of Loan Shark maybe.
I think that's fair, because I don't even know how cheap it is these days.
Yeah.
It's not crazy. It's definitely a budget deck, and it has a few good tricks. You know, Plasma's great, Dark Angel's great, Dark Law is your best bet. It's just Shifter on legs, so it can win 100%. But I don't know.
Yeah, there's a few pricey cards right now. It's the Trap, and then the is it Shining Flare Wingman dude. He hasn't been officially announced for the tins, but there's a really good chance he will be reprinted the tins, because, you know, Power of the Elements is in the tins coming up, and it's just very, very likely to see it. However, as of right now, those cards are like €10 each probably, which is fine considering the rest of the hero package is very, very cheap. But in terms of power level, I don't know if I'd put it above Labyrinth. I would definitely put it above Dark World though, so I think top of Loan Shark, very good for Heroes right now. If this was Dark Law Turbo, yeah, go ahead, definitely put it at the top. But like, it's Heroes, so definitely top of Loan Shark, I think. Fun deck though.
Next up, I hate to say it, but Stun is just a really good deck. It's really good as an anti-meta deck, and it's just so cheap. Like, this deck is so cheap in multiple ways. It's cheap when you're playing it, and it's cheap to buy. Stun is just like a really hard deck to play around. Even the top decks just struggle against stun so much. Runic Stun is probably the best variant right now, because Runic Stun is just Runic Stun. It's just such a good way to play a stun deck. It's not as easy as people say. If you want to win like really good events, you have to play very well. You have to know exactly like how you're playing the deck. You can't just summon Fossil Dyna Pass and expect to win. You have to play the deck perfectly. Floodgates are OP, I understand, but you gotta play perfectly if you're gonna win with this deck. But it is a budget deck and it's very good. It has a very high power ceiling. So I'd say about there.
Yeah, maybe. I will say one thing I will give a bit of credit on is the fact that Konami's been hitting a lot of floodgates on the ban list recently by limiting cards like there can be only one Rivalry of Warlords, and even like straight up banning stuff like Summon Limit and things like that. So yeah, people would have had to get a bit creative when making stun decks now, but the fact that they've been very well represented in a few tournaments recently and are actually doing well, not gonna lie, it really sickens me. I hate stun so much. I think it's really dumb. This is speaking from someone who's played it before, don't get me wrong. But yeah, I don't like the deck, but I will give credit where credit's due.
Next up, Mimighoul. I think Mimighoul probably belongs around here.
Yep.
Mimighoul is pretty cool. It's a kind of a new archetype. The gimmick is you set cards to your opponent's side of the field, and they don't want to flip summon them because they have negative effects when you flip summon them. Like discard a card or your opponent draws a card. But if you don't flip them, you also have floodgates to where if your opponent controls a face down defense position monster, they can't like summon monsters and stuff like that. So it's a really cool gimmick. It can also run Shifter, let's go. But yeah, it's new and it's only the first wave of support is out right now, but it is cheap, which is really cool. And this deck can really catch your opponent off guard. It's a very weird deck. I think it has a surprise factor going for it, which is really cool. Shifter's one hell of a card. There's some cool interactions with like talents. Like if you give your opponent one of your monsters and the effect activates, you just talents them and rip a card out of their hand, which is just really, really good. I think it belongs about here. It's new and it needs more cards to be higher up, but I think it's pretty cool for now.
Yeah, I honestly don't know too much about this deck. It's still brand new. I haven't seen many of the cards. Honestly, I didn't even know about the deck until Sean told me about 10 minutes before we started recording. But hey, I think the idea is really cool and really interesting, so I look forward to seeing what this deck does in the future.
Next up, Drytron. Drytron receives support in Infinite Forbidden. It's not half bad, but we're in a really bad format for Drytron. It's pretty budget, which is cool. It's not the most budget, but it's fairly budget compared to a lot of other decks. And you know, it's good old Drytron. If you get going and you set up a bunch of negates and do some crazy stuff, it's pretty cool. But doesn't have a great time into a lot of cards like Droll and Shifter, which are really strong. So yeah, it's kind of like here. The new cards are great and all, but they're not what the deck needs right now. Maybe in a new format, the deck will like rise up because the support's not half bad. But I think overall, it's not the time for Drytron, at least right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Drytron's definitely a really good deck. Maybe not this format, but we're talking about how good a deck is based on its performance and also its budget with this tier list specifically. And yeah, a lot of the cards are cheap, but two very essential cards are still sitting at least €20 each right now, and the deck really doesn't function without them. And it doesn't seem like there's a reprint for those in the near future, so yeah, I think Drytron is definitely where it needs to be in Mimi Goldmine.
Next up, Exosister. Exosister has pretty much gotten every card reprinted, and all the cards outside the archetype are dirt cheap. It's fantastic. It's such a budget deck. It can run Shifter, it can main deck evenly, it banishes stuff. It's just fantastic as a deck. All of their previously expensive cards are just pennies now. Most stuff got reprinted in the tins last year, and then recently with the Battles of Legends set, the remainder of the stuff got reprinted. So, a fantastic budget deck. It is a bit of an older deck, however, so power creep is a thing. So in that regard, it's not as good as some of the newer decks, but I think it's a very solid option, especially for budget players. Next up, Ancient Gears. Guys, did you know that Ancient Gears made it to Day 2 at the North American World Championship qualifiers? Isn't that insane? Ancient Gears are the best deck in the game. Some of your cards are pretty expensive, but they will get reprinted. They've been reprinted in the OCG, meaning that they'll either get reprinted in the tins or in the Quarter Century Bonanza. So this deck will be pretty damn cheap. It's pretty damn cool. Unironically, it has a lot of really cool things it can do. A really good matchup against Tenpai, because Chaos Integer Giant just turns off your opponent's monster effects during the battle phase. Ancient Gear Fortress, if you get that card, is almost an instant win against any deck, unless they can negate it or get rid of it. It basically says your opponent cannot respond to your Ancient Gear effects just forever while it's on the field, and then it cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects. So it just is a super strong OTK deck. It can go first, I think, better than Tenpai, because it can set up some boards and stuff like that. It is a bit more bricky, but once Ancient Gear Statue comes out, this deck is going to be genuinely, I'd say, a pretty damn good rogue deck, and hopefully a really damn good budget deck too.
Yeah, honestly, Sean's a certified Ancient Gear gamer, so I 100% trust his opinion there. I will say it's really good to pick up the deck right now and get familiar with the combos, because I'm playing against Sean now and he has all these new combos I'm not even following or understanding, and they seem really, really good. So definitely now is a good time to familiarize yourself with Ancient Gears. They'll definitely see a lot of representation in the future.
Next up, Raid Raptors. Raid Raptors were a really good deck like a few formats ago. They're still not bad, but now is really not the format where, a big towers is like unbeatable. Towers is great, of course, but Struggles Against Shifter, Droll is pretty much a death sentence against this deck. But it's really cool, it has a lot of space for non-engine. A lot of decks are not ready for towers. It can be hard to get towers out. Once you get towers out, it could be pretty difficult for your opponent to get rid of it. Pretty damn budget as well. A lot of the cards got reprinted. There might be one or two expensive cards, like Skip Force and Strangulanius, but even those have gone down a good bit since the deck got no support. I think it's pretty damn cool. It does struggle a lot against a lot of really common stuff, but I think it can definitely catch your opponent off guard. A lot of decks and side decks are just not ready for towers, so I think this is a decent option.
I think it is a very good deck. I will say though, it is a heavy combo deck, and like you really need your plays to go off. And I kind of look at this format like we've been suffering with Snake Eyes for the past, I don't even know how long, and it could be such an oppressive format because if you're not facing the top meta, you're facing a bunch of other decks that are trying to beat the meta, in the sense that you're going to be seeing a lot of Shifter, you're going to be seeing a lot of Droll. It's going to be a lot of stuff that it's going to be really hard for Raid Raptor to play through. Yeah, great deck, but it's definitely got some really, really tough matchups ahead of it, this format. So yeah, it's great. It's definitely a good budget deck. Maybe it'd be good to familiarize yourself with it now, especially when you're going into the next few formats or whatever. But yeah, it's a good deck, but it's definitely got a steep hill climb, I'll say.
Next up, we have Budget Centurion. We have good old Manadium. Manadium's not bad. It's basically a really good kind of synchro combo deck, or it's a King Calamity Lock turbo deck. So it's kind of just, at this point, like worse Centurion, but it's definitely not a bad deck. It's much cheaper than Centurion, which is great. It's more of a kind of a combo deck than Centurion. It does struggle to a lot of the things we've already talked about, but it is a lot cheaper now. And, big kind of wombo combo synchro spam decks, they're still cool, they're still not half bad. You end on some crazy boards. A lot of cards are getting reprinted in the new tins, so it's not a terrible option. Is it going to be like, the meta killer? No, not really. It's a little bit unremarkable.
The whole concept of the deck is fine. It kind of just like goes for a big Crimson Dragon play that brings out your King Calamity, but that can be really, really hard to do, and with the amount of hand traps that are being played this format, it's going to be really, really hard to even get there. So the deck has a lot of stuff to face right now, and I don't think it's as good as it should be, this format that we're coming into. It's fine, maybe it's just not the format right now.
Next we have Trap Tricks. Trap Tricks are pretty budget. They don't suffer too much from a lot of the common issues in this format. It's a lot harder to interact with traps than it is with like monster effects and stuff like that. The deck is super cheap. All the cards are really, really cheap. Basically buy 3 copies of the structure deck and you're sorted. But now you can even add Ragnarika stuff, which is really cool because you can almost turn this deck into a combo deck. And the Ragnarika engine you need to buy for the deck is not too expensive. Compared to decks like Plant Link, you really don't need as many Ragnarika cards for Trap Trick. And Trap Trick can OTK now, which is hilarious with the new Ragnarika cards. I think it's pretty cool. As a budget deck, it's damn good. Trap decks are just always really, really good. And I think it might catch some people off guard.
Yeah, I think that's very generous to put in Tesco branded though, to be honest with you. I was
Maybe.
more thinking like, in terms of a trap deck, yeah, it's fine. I don't think it's better than Labyrinth though. I think, yeah, if we're talking about budget stuff, it's definitely really, really budget and really budget friendly. But as you said yourself, you would need to be adding a few Ragnarok cards in order to get going. So I would put it definitely. I don't know if I want to put it above Labyrinth, to be quite honest with you.
Fair enough.
I kind of put it middle of the road, middle of Mimi Goldmine. It's a fine deck. It's whatever. But the structure deck came out a while ago now, and yeah, it's just kind of people know what to expect from Trap Tricks now, and people are able to play around it. I'm just thinking about all the other decks in the Tesco branded tier right now, and I don't really think Trap Trick stands too much of a chance, especially when we're putting the Monks of Giants like branded tier.
My rationale for like Labyrinth is that it's a great deck, but if you want to play it like budget, you're very limited. You can't play transaction rollback and stuff like that. But I think a low power level Labyrinth deck is better than an almost full power level Trap Trick deck. So if you think about it that way, I think Labyrinth is 100% better as a budget deck. Of course, like it's a better deck overall, but if we're talking about budget, I think this is still fair. Next up, Flunderies. Okay, it's extremely budget, like extremely budget. But the new Max C card kills it because it's not like Max C where it's only special summons. Anytime you normal summon a card, that new Max C card draws you a card. So for that reason, I don't think it's as good, but it's a fantastic budget deck. Plays Shifter, plays Harpy's Feather Storm. It's just so good. But kind of the same with Exorcister. It is a bit outdated. It came out a long time ago, and now the game's kind of catching up to where normal summon focused decks are being punished. Now with cards like Perulia and stuff like that. So okay, maybe we should put it down. But it is super budget. Like it's so cheap.
Yeah, I think you did right by putting it down just next to Gimmick Puppet. I think you're right. You pretty much hit the nail on the head with all the points I'd make there as well. Flu is still really good, but yeah, just with the timing right now, I don't think it's as good as Gimmick Puppet.
Next up, Crystal Beasts. Now I think Crystal Beasts have a shot, especially with like Crystal Beast Horus and stuff like that. And Horus is getting reprinted, so that's gonna be nice. But I think overall, Crystal Beast, the deck can run Shifter, which is cool. You can play it like a lot of different ways, so you can play it as kind of a combo aggressive deck or a very controlled deck. The Horus engine is pretty nice and that's getting reprinted. The Crystal Beast cards on their own are very cheap because it's a structure deck. So I think it can do a lot of things. It can definitely floodgate your opponent in many ways. Secret Village of the Spellcasters is pretty nice. It can pretty much search any field spell. That's why it goes so well with Horus. So I think if you're going to play this deck, you really want to play it down a control route. But compared to some other control decks, it's not as good. And you might really need to invest in a lot of like really good staples, or just really good like cards, and that might drive up the price. I think it's not too bad as a budget deck, but if you really want to go crazy with it, you need to invest a lot more money in it. And even then, it's not going to be that great. So I think about here.
Kind of like in the middle of Loan Shark, one of the lower tiers. It's fine. Crystal Beast is grand. It's a good deck. You can buy 3 structure decks and you pretty much have the majority of the deck right there. But yeah, nothing as exceptional as when it first came out. It's fine. It's Crystal Beast.
Marincess, I hate to say it guys. Marincess is a really cool deck. I really love the deck. It's super budget. You can fit in so many hand traps. A million 1-card combos. But the problem is, your 1-card combos don't end on anything too crazy. And you can fit in a lot of non-engine, but so can all the top tier decks. The top tier decks can even fit in more non-engine, which is crazy. It's not a bad deck at all. It's really budget, and that's fantastic. But I think compared to a lot of other decks, it's just not as good, which really sucks. Maybe the new support will help. But overall, I think we're lacking a good bit with Marincess. It dies to Shifter, dies to Droll. It's just the same stuff, you know. A lot of the lower tier decks just die to those cards. It's a really fun deck and very budget, so pick it up if you like. It's definitely a really cool deck to master because there is a lot of cool tech cards you can put in the deck. Like White Howling is a really funny one. Marincess is a fan favorite and it's always going to get support, so I think it belongs about in the middle of the tier list. Next up, Red Dragon Archfiend. It's pretty cool. The main cards are cheap. The horror stuff is getting reprinted. However, the new card that got reprinted in Terminal Revenge is pretty damn expensive, but it's really good. However, kind of like Bestial Horus, like Resonator type of deck, it suffers a lot from the stuff we've talked about before. It doesn't have any crazy kind of things it can do compared to a lot of other decks. It doesn't really have an edge compared to like all the other decks above it. It's kind of like a solid combo deck, but that's really not what we need right now. And even if you're talking about budget, there are a lot of cards that are kind of expensive. I mean, the Bestial Dispatter is getting reprinted, but some of the older Bestials are getting up there in price. Overall, it's not terrible. It's more budget than it used to be because the Horus stuff is getting reprinted, but I still think it's not the best for this format.
Yeah, this deck can die the Shifter, considering we talked about how many other decks are playing Shifter this format. It seems like this deck can die really quickly. However, it is really cheap when you're just placing like the 3 structure decks together. It can make a really cool, consistent deck. But you still want some outer engines as well to really help you, such as Horus as you mentioned, and also even Bestials. So yeah, in terms of budget, it can be pretty good, but in terms of power level, it's kind of mediocre. Middle of Mimi Goldmine, I think is the right place to keep it.
Next up, Sword Soul. Sword Soul has not seen much play recently, but I think it's better than Marincess. Because Protoss got unbanned, you have a really easy floodgate you can work with. And you know, if you win the die roll, go first, floodgate your opponent, you're going to win that match. It has certain things it can do well. It's a lot more consistent than some of the other decks here. A lot of cards are just really powerful. It's pretty cheap as well. I think Moyi is the most expensive card. Shenging might have went up a bit, but I think overall it's not even too expensive. But again, it's showing its age. It has been a while since it came out, and it hasn't really received any support like since it came out. So I think it belongs around here. You can find success with it, but overall there are a lot of better options. Next up, Dinos. Dinos probably belong around here.
Yeah, again, Dinos is a great deck, just like Sword Soul, but they haven't really seen much representation. Still a bit more than Sword Soul has in the last couple of months. It's still a great deck. It's still fantastic. It'll be very versatile as well, depending on what kind of way you want to take the deck. It's great. It's perfectly fine deck, but I don't know. Compared to all the other heavy hitters on this list, it definitely just deserves to be in kind of the middle of the road. Definitely the high end of the middle tier. High end Mimi Goldmine. It's good though.
The cards from Wild Survivors are getting reprinted though, which is pretty nice. So your Ground Xeno is going to be a lot more affordable, which really does help the deck. You can even play it as a going first or going second deck. A blind second deck is probably the best way to play it. There's always a chance that Misk can come off the ban list, and if that happens, this deck will shoot up a lot. So we can always hope for that, but overall, I think for now, it belongs about there. Next up, Madolche. Madolche got new support, but they're not really getting any reprints anytime soon, and the deck is pretty damn expensive. Now, it's not bad. It can run Shifter, and it has a lot of really kind of unique things it can do. Works really well with the Vernistuff cards, but they're also pretty expensive. I only put this here because the new support came out, and it's not even terrible. It's like pretty decent support. But as a budget deck, there are so many cards that just have not been reprinted in so long. If they get reprinted, that's fantastic. That's really good. The deck would shoot up maybe about here.
Yeah, I don't know, but we'll still go with current circumstances, so still keep you on Loan Shark.
Next up, we have Plant Link / Rikus and Avalon. The reason I'm making a distinction here is because Plant Link cost a lot more considering you have to run all the Ragnarok cards, and they're pretty damn expensive. If you're talking about Rikus and Avalon, or even like Rika, Aromas and Avalon, all that, that's pretty cheap. You can afford that. That's like not even half bad. The deck is pretty good, however, it's again a very glass cannon type of deck. Really dies a lot of hand traps. The main problem with Rika is that it just suffers to so many hand traps, but it's so strong if you can just resolve your combo. It really is a glass cannon deck. If you go full combo, you are not going to lose. But if you get interrupted, you have a very high chance of losing. It's very all in, but it's a really cool deck. It can do a lot of really cool things. Being able to tribute your opponent's monsters is fantastic, but there's not many towers that you're going to really have to worry about. I think overall, it's a good deck, but not so much for this format.
Yeah, I definitely agree. As you said, the amount of hand traps this thing dies to, it can be really tricky. It's still a really powerful deck. Like, you've been playing it with the Aromage cards, which I think really elevated. I haven't seen a full power with the Ragnarok stuff, but you know, that's really expensive, so we're going to focus mostly on Rikus and Avalon with Aromage. And it's a pretty good deck. When you can get going, it's really powerful, but that's the thing, you just really need to get going, which can be really hard in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!
Finally, we have Horus. We can call this Horus Stun. That might be the most fair way to put it. As a stun deck, not even half bad. All the cards are getting reprinted, so that's really good. It's going to be nice and cheap. But you know, if you're playing stun, you're going to play like Runic Stun or just pure stun. Horus Stun is not bad. It has its advantages, but I don't think it's as good as the main stun decks. It's nice and cheap, and the Horus engine is really good in a lot of decks. So if you want to talk about the Horus engine, it can go up a bit, but for now, if you're talking about Horus stun or even a Horus pure deck, you're not going to get very far with it. So that's it for the list. So let us know what you think in the comments. Do you agree or disagree with the tier list? Let us know. I think it's pretty fair. Also, let us know if we missed any good budget decks. We'd love to know. So thanks for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments, and give us suggestions for tier lists you want to see in the future.